Good evening, colleagues. My name is Professor Gisela van Rensburg, and I'm from the Department of Health Studies. I'm the M&D coordinator, and I will be facilitating this session tonight. And for the sake of the network, I will switch off my camera once I start. You will see my slides on the screen, and we are going to discuss how to prepare your work for the examination and also how to respond to examiners' feedback. Sorry, I must just get my slides to move. There you go. Right. So we will look at the preparation that you have to make in terms of getting ready for the examination. And we will look at what your responsibilities are, or what you are going to do, what your supervisor is going to support you with, and all the administrative processes that relate to the preparation of submitting to examination. And then we will also look at what are the requirements to respond to the examiner's feedback once the examination process is complete? Right, so as student, your first responsibility is to ensure that you complete your writing, that you complete the entire document, you complete all your chapters, all the work that has to go into the thesis or the dissertation, and in that way, you ensure that the document, including all the chapters, are included in this final document. So if we say an entire document, we also mean the appendices or the annexures that must be added to the document. So there will be annexures such as your ethics clearance certificate. It will be the permission letters, the gatekeeper letters. It will be your data collection instrument. It could be examples of how you analyze the data. It could be statistical reports. And then what is also important is to add your receipt of the Turnitin report, as well as the similarity index, in other words, the first part of the report. If the thesis is edited by a language editor, you will add a certificate of the language editor as well, as evidence that it has been completed. There might be other documents that are relevant to your study that will also become annexures in the document, or relevant documents will be part of this final document. With the annexures, when you start sorting or attaching the annexures, make sure that there's a logical flow in how you attach the annexures. In other words, you will start with the ethics certificate. Then as the study progressed, what happened next? Then it was the permission, then it was the consent for the participants, then it was the data collection instrument. So have a logical flow in how you present your annexures in this document. You as student is responsible to thoroughly proofread the entire thesis, eliminate all grammatical or typographical errors or formatting errors. So the first responsibility of proofreading the document will be your responsibility. And we will also, when we get to the supervisor, talk about the role of the supervisor in terms of the proofreading. But make sure that you read the entire document. And when you read that document, by this time you are so tired of the study, it feels as if you can read it with your eyes closed. But read it as a critical reader. Read it as if you are examining the document. Make sure that everything is clear, that you are critical when you read the document, and that you put yourself in the shoes of whoever is going to read it, which will be the examiners, but also the supervisor. So read it carefully before you submit it to the supervisor for their approval of the final document. The formatting will be according to guidelines of the university. You will receive guidelines in terms of the front pages, what the title page should look like, what the dedication should look, or the declaration should look like. What is the wording in the declaration? Please do not use someone else's thesis that was submitted 3-4 years back because the format has changed. So make sure that you use the format that you will receive from the university. Then every department or college also have guidelines. Make sure that you adhere to those guidelines. It could be guidelines that are specifically related to the discipline or the field of research. So make sure that you meet all those guidelines in terms of the heading style, the margins, the font size, the citation style. All the formatting guidelines, make sure that you adhere to that before you submit it to your supervisor. Right. You will receive this. This will be an iterative process now. You will receive feedback from your supervisor more than once towards the end. So when you plan your studies and you plan the finalization of the studies, keep in mind that it's going to be a back and forth between you and the supervisor, between you and the editor. If you make use of somebody who supports you with the formatting, it will be back and forth between you and that person as well. So make provision for the time. And I always want to say that you should at least make provision for 2 to 3 months to finalize the dissertation or the thesis towards the end. So do not think that you can write up to 2 or 3 days before you submit your thesis for examination. It really takes time to refine the document and to finalize the document. As examiners, one wants to see a scientifically and professionally prepared document when you examine. The content can be as good as possible or as good as it can get, but if it's presented untidy, it does affect the overall feeling that one has about that thesis or dissertation. So make sure that it's presented well. The fact that it's presented well will not necessarily give you better marks if it's a poor study, but it could make that difference between, for example, a 72 and a 75. If it's a good study and it is very well presented, it could make a difference. We often see examiners making a comment about although they make comments about the technical aspects, but we often see that they make comments about the overall presentation of the dissertation. They will say that this was so neatly prepared, it was such a pleasure to read the document. So make sure that the examiner really sees it as a professional and a scientific report. You could involve peers to read your dissertation, or ask colleagues to maybe critically read the dissertation. If they have feedback, discuss the feedback with your supervisor before you make any changes. They might give you feedback on language errors or unclear sentences or technical issues. That is always a good thing. And one often finds that with critical readers, they look at those aspects like the technical presentation as well. But when it comes to content, make sure that you discuss it with your supervisor before you make any changes to any of the content, so that you are in agreement that the changes are indeed relevant and correct to make. Your supervisor will give approval at various levels. So first of all, the supervisor will say, yes, you are getting towards the end of your study. You can put everything together now, and I want to see the full thesis, and I want to assess the full thesis. Once the supervisor is ready for submission, the supervisor will indicate to you that you are ready for submission, and you may submit the form, and we will talk about the form a bit later as well. It is a V20 form. It's the intent to submit. No, sorry, it's not a V20. It's another number. I will show it to you on the other slide. But it's a form that you will access on the system where you apply or you indicate your intention to submit. So you complete the form and you actually request to submit your thesis for examination. That form will then go to your supervisor. Your supervisor will look at the title and will then approve that you may submit for examination. And then you will upload it to the system, and it will go to the exam department, who will then continue with the rest of the administrative processes for the process to continue to appoint the examiners. So your supervisor is going to be very involved in this final phase and is going to support you in terms of the final timelines and what must be ready and when are the submission dates and when you can submit. So the communication between you and your supervisor is extremely important during this last phase, so that you can make sure that you follow the correct procedures. The submission dates for Masters and Doctoral are 15 June or 15 November. Now, we will talk about some leeway in terms of the submission dates when I get to that slide, but it's important that you know that these are the two submission dates, and that one basically works towards those two dates. Now, if you do not meet the June submission date, you are still a registered student for the entire year, so you will then still be able to submit towards the end of the year as well. So a lot of planning will go into this last phase on exactly what you must do at what stage. Your supervisor will then give you guidance and support in terms of what you need academically, what you need to correct academically, and where you have to improve to ensure that it is as good as it could get. But then the supervisor will also be there for emotional support. This last final stages of the study can be very stressful and can be very difficult. Students are anxious. It is a lot of pressure. It might be towards the end of the year in November, where you might be in a work environment where you also have to deal with final year reports, and so it could be a very difficult time for you emotionally as well, and also of letting go of your study. You know, you've invested so much time and effort, and it's been such a huge part of your life for many years, and suddenly you get to a point where you have to let go. You now have to make a decision. This study has now been completed and I have to let go, and someone else must now decide whether this study is good enough. So it is an emotional roller coaster towards the end of the year or of the process of the journey. Your supervisor will be there to offer you some encouragement and motivation, and also help you to stay focused and manage your stress, and also specifically manage your time, because the supervisor has experience in how much time is needed for which phase. So listen to your supervisor, discuss it with your supervisor, ask them to support you in terms of planning your time and planning the processes that are going to follow. There's going to be a back and forth feedback, which will be constructive in terms of improving the last final chapters, making the last corrections, making changes where needed, making sure that the entire thesis is consistent and coherent, whether everything is clear, whether certain things are missing, whether the chapters flow logically from the one to the other. They might indicate that your summaries of one chapter and the introduction of the other chapter does not necessarily flow from the one to the other. These are small coherence issues that might come up towards the end of the study and when you are completing. So this iterative process, it's not going to be a matter of you submitting the final thesis to the supervisor once and say, please read the thesis. The supervisor gives feedback and it goes back to you, and you make corrections and you submit. It will be a back and forth quite a number of times. You might have various drafts, and please remember with your drafts always to rename your draft. A good way of naming the file or the draft will be to identify it by the date. So you will have the file name, but with every file name have the new date, so that you can see the progress. And if your supervisor says go back to the previous version, that you exactly know which one is the previous version. It sometimes happens that you miss some of the feedback that the supervisor has given, and the supervisor might say, I'm not repeating these comments or the corrections. Please go back to the previous version. So make sure that you then know which one is the previous version. You can have your own way of numbering or labeling your documents, but have a sound, clear way of doing that, so that you can easily go back to a previous or 3 versions prior to that version, and you will know by looking at either the number or the date. In terms of the rigor of the study, it will be very important to check the methodological rigor. Is the research methodology sound and appropriately applied? If you said in chapter 1 or your introductory chapter, this is what you are going to do in terms of the sampling procedures, is that aligned to what you said in your methodology chapter? Is that indeed aligned with what you actually did when you selected your participants in your study? So that congruence and that alignment in terms of the methodology is important to ensure the methodological rigor of the study. With your literature review, there will also be checks and balances in terms of whether the literature review is comprehensive, whether you have used up-to-date sources or recent sources, and also whether you have updated your literature review after the initial literature review was conducted. It could have been chapter 2, which is often the case. It's the second chapter in the thesis, and you've conducted a very thorough literature review, but since then you've collected the data, you've analyzed, you've written the rest of the thesis. It is 2 years down the line, and you did not update your literature review. So it would be important that towards the end, when you work through the entire thesis, you are going to work chapter for chapter. So you will work on your chapter 1. You will make sure that chapter 1 is actually a mirror of the last chapter. So what you promised in chapter 1, is that actually what you delivered in your study and also concluded in your last chapter? I always say that chapter 1 and the last chapter should be a mirror. When one examines a thesis and you read chapter 1 and you read the last chapter, you have a very good idea of what the plan was and what the outcome was. And then the detail is between these 2 chapters. So make sure that you go back to your chapter 1, and also then your literature review. Make sure that your literature review is indeed up to date, and the new developments have been integrated into the literature review. New publications that were published, or articles that were published since you've completed your literature review. Make sure that your literature review is up to date with the most recent information. The supervisor will also do a critical analysis to ensure that the analysis and interpretation of the data are rigorous and well articulated, that the data that you found and the conclusions that you drew are aligned, that the way in which you interpreted the statistics are correct and are aligned with what the plan was, what the objectives were. Did you address the objectives? Does this study answer the objectives? So it will be a critical analysis in terms of the rigor, the academic rigor of the study. Then in terms of the compliance, the institutional guidelines, what are the guidelines in terms of putting a thesis together, in terms of formatting, reference style, what are the submission guidelines, what must be in the thesis, what is the layout of the thesis, and as I said there, the colleges and the departments and even certain disciplines have specific styles, and the type of study will have specific style in how you present the entire study. All the chapters, is it a qualitative study that maybe does not require a full literature review before data is collected? Is it a provisional literature review, or is it rather a chapter that discusses the theoretical underpinning of the study? So these are aspects that would have been discussed and sorted out at the beginning of the study, but towards the end, it's important that when you read the full thesis, that it still makes sense. And that the flow of, especially the first chapters, that it still makes sense for this particular study, and also in terms of what the institutional guidelines require. In terms of the ethical considerations, the ethics certificate will always be an annexure in the thesis. It's important that the ethics certificate must be correct in terms of the title, in terms of whether it is still valid. When you have a study where you change the title, it is always a good idea to rather have, even towards the end, if the title is changed, it's always a good idea to have a revised ethics certificate. Now, if the title changes, your supervisor can write a memo to the College Research Ethics Committee and then just indicate that the title was refined for whatever reason, and they could give you a new ethics certificate. If for any reason you had to make changes during your study, and there were adjustments made to, for example, the methodology, that would also have to be communicated with the ethics committee, but that happens at the time that the changes are made. The supervisor then communicates with the ethics committee that, for example, you are going to now change your data collection instrument from a semi-structured interview to an unstructured interview. Now, depending on the extent of those changes, the ethics committee will indicate whether the proposal the full proposal must be reviewed again, or whether only the changes are noted and also placed on the record with your proposal. So any changes that are made to the proposal, to the title, please discuss with your supervisor to determine whether it is necessary to get a new ethics certificate. If you get a second or a new ethics certificate, your time could have lapsed. Some ethics certificates are only valid for 6 months when it's a vulnerable population, or it could be valid for 1 year, and a new certificate must be issued. Attach all the ethics certificates that you have as annexures in a logical flow, and you can have a short paragraph explaining why you have 2 or 3 ethics certificates. You can indicate the title changed, or your sampling changed, or the population had to change, or whatever the change was. Just make a short note so that the examiner can see that you understand the importance of having a valid ethics certificate throughout the study. So with the final proofreading, the supervisor is going to assist in terms of the proofreading, but remember, the supervisor is not a language editor. The supervisor might show you grammatical or typographical or formatting errors, but they are not going to language edit your thesis. So they might rewrite a paragraph for you and indicate how they want you to address this or attend to this specific section, but they will never language edit your full thesis. For that, you need a professional editor. Now, in most cases, if not all, PhD students submit their thesis for a language editor, and preferably all master students. For me, there is just no reason for not having a professional editor editing the final document to ensure that it is a scientifically sound report in the end. With the final proofreading, the supervisor will also do checks in terms of the consistency of the use of terminology, the consistency in the use of the reference style in text and in the reference list, and also the formatting throughout the document. Now, the consistency in terms of methodology, terminology, is something that is quite important, because one tends to use synonyms, and you think, but it means the same, but in the end, again, it is a scientific report, and it must have consistency in terms of which term you are going to use for which activity. If you, for example, do a study and you talk about students and learners, and you use the terms interchangeably, that would be not good practice, because although they might mean the same, they might also differ. In some cases, the argument is that higher education students are students, and school-going learners are learners. So make sure that you use the terminology consistently throughout the thesis. Plagiarism checks are important, and here the scientific integrity of the researcher is very important. If you use information from a document, make sure that you refer to that source where you got it from. If you use a quote, then please refer to that specific source, providing the page as well where you found that specific quote. So if you use a reference style that only requires the year, if it's a quotation, then you add the page where you found the quotation. It's important that you then do not plagiarize someone else without acknowledging them. The Turnitin report to indicate the similarity index must also be added as an annexure to the thesis. In some instances, they do not add the Turnitin report, but it's always good practice to have the receipt and the first page that indicates the percentage, and then also the highest few of the individual similarities percentages, so that one can see what the percentages are. Your supervisor will interpret the full report. So you submit the full report to your supervisor, who will then assess the full report and interpret the results. But for the sake of the thesis, you will only add 1 or 2 pages, so that one can just see the highest similarities. Now you will hear this back and forth. The supervisor reads and sends it back to you, and then reads it again and sends it back to you. Then with the final approval, after you have had it edited, language edited, you've made the corrections, your supervisor has read it, and there's it is now in its final stages, the supervisor will sign off the final version. In other words, they will in writing indicate to you, you are now ready to submit. This is now the final examination version. The examination version, the one that you are going to upload on the system, and you will receive a link to upload the thesis onto the system. That final version must be in Word format and also in PDF format. When you PDF that document, please go through that document again to make sure that the PDF did not change the formatting, so that there are no headings at the bottom of a page, or the page numbers are still correct, or check that no text has dropped off somewhere. So check the final versions of the thesis. The supervisor will guide you through this through this submission process. And what is going to happen is that once your supervisor says, yes, you are ready to submit, you're going to submit the intent to submit document. Once all the appointments of the examiners have been completed and approved, then you will receive a letter from the exam department, and the exam department will send you a link, and you will use that link to upload your Word and PDF document for the examiners. Your supervisor cannot upload it for you, and your supervisor can also not send you the link to the examination, to the upload link for uploading. If you wait for the link and your supervisor is also waiting for the link, please communicate through your supervisor. Your supervisor will communicate with the department, with the M&D coordinator in the department, and the M&D coordinator will then also communicate with the exam department. If you qualify for the oral defense, and that would be PhD students who registered in 2022 onwards. We discussed that last week in the session. Then you will also start your preparation for your oral defense or your oral examination. Master students do not have oral examinations, but the PhD students who have registered for in 2022, 2023 and onwards will have to do an oral examination. So you will prepare that presentation. You will get guidelines on what is required of you in the presentation. You will also have opportunity to practice the presentation, to conduct mock defense sessions. You could invite peers that can ask you questions, or you can do it with your supervisor, and the supervisor could invite colleagues in the department. But make sure that you go through a mock process so that you also just become comfortable in the type of questions that could be asked in an oral examination. The supervisor will also guide you in how to effectively present and defend your thesis. And when you do this mock examination, the supervisor will also be able to guide you in where to give more information and where to maybe include other important aspects or explanations that will in the end show your ability to share your knowledge and your expertise on the topic, but also in terms of the methodology. You don't have to worry, your supervisor will be there at the oral examination, and they will only be there for moral support because they will not have any decision-making rights. So they will be observers at the oral examination, but at least you know that you have moral support when you do the oral examination, which will be an online examination. After the examination, the examiners submit the reports to the non-examining chairperson, which will then send the reports, anonymized reports, to the supervisor. And the supervisor will then look at the reports first and then discuss the reports with you as a student to make sure that you understand what the examiners require. They will not leave you with that with the reports, and they should not. If it happens, you must ask for support of the supervisor. They will support you in how to approach the questions, the comments, and how to make the corrections, and how to finalize the corrections. I will show you the way in which you can report on the corrections that you have made and how you can finalize your thesis. Just in a few slides, I will show you that. If it's necessary that you have to resubmit for examination, your supervisor will also guide you in those processes. She or he will explain to you what corrections are required, and you will then follow exactly the same processes as with the first submission. You will make sure that the formatting is correct, that the language is correct, that the entire thesis meets all the requirements, and it will be a new submission in terms of the link that you receive. You will upload the 2 versions again via this link that you will receive from the examination department. So should it happen that it is a resubmission for re-examination, the processes will then be the same as the initial upload and resubmission and submission. So your supervisor will also, during this phase, you come towards the end of your studies, and now everything hangs in the air. Suddenly 4, 5, 6 years hard work is just, you've submitted it, and now what now? So your supervisor is there to support you in terms of what is the next step. It will be the publication of the work, and even though it might not be a requirement for you, if you have registered in before 2020, then you are not required to submit the manuscripts. But if not, you are required to submit manuscripts, and your supervisor will assist you in the processes in submitting the manuscript. What are your future opportunities in terms of research? Is there a possibility of, for example, a postdoctoral, postdoc fellowship, or any other future opportunities? If you are a master's student, what are the future opportunities in terms of registering for a PhD student? In terms of a topic, could you continue with this topic, or whatever the future plans are? Your supervisor could support you in terms of some advice on that, and even on career development, how you can go about enhancing your and progressing your career, if you are interested in maybe continuing with the research career, or even just applying for different positions that relate to your study. Your supervisor will not be able to find a job for you, but will be able to guide you and mentor you in terms of what are your opportunities now that you have completed your studies. Someone asked last week, whose responsibility is it if a student fails? It is very difficult to say it is someone else's responsibility other than that of the student, because you are ultimately the researcher, and it is ultimately a process that you have to pass. The quality has to be of such a nature that you pass the degree, but there is an ultimate responsibility towards the student from the side of the supervisor and the institution as well. So the supervisor will ensure throughout your journey that the thesis is of a good quality, that it meets the academic standards, and it's ready for submission before they give permission. Students are sometimes not happy with their supervisors if the supervisor says, no, I don't think you are ready for submission. This is June now. Wait until end of the year and work on your chapters and improve your thesis before you submit towards the end of the year. Or they might request you to re-register for the next year. So listen to your supervisor if they are concerned about the standard, if they are concerned about the quality, and rather sacrifice another 6 months, or sacrifice some time, and make sure that the thesis is of a good quality when it is submitted. With this, the manuscript requirements, master students do not have to prepare a manuscript as part of the examination requirements, but there are certain agreements and certain requirements in departments and in colleges. My suggestion always is to a master's student, um, write a manuscript after completion of the study, even though it's not a requirement for part of the exam results. Write a manuscript on, you've done a study, you've worked hard on this study, you've got data, you've got information that you want to share with the scientific community. You want to share it with maybe the participants that were engaged in your study. So please highly consider preparing a manuscript with your supervisor, because it is also a learning curve, and the supervisor will guide you through the process of how to write a manuscript, how to finalize a manuscript, eventually submit to a journal, and then also deal with the feedback that comes from the reviewers, and correcting the manuscript and improving the manuscript. There is quite a lot of skill involved in writing a 5,000-word manuscript from a 120-page dissertation. So that's another learning experience for you as a master's graduate, to learn how to write a condensed report without copying and pasting from your dissertation, but writing a standalone publication from your study. The other valuable information or valuable or value that it has to publish an article at master's level is when you decide you want to do your PhD and you want to go the route of PhD by publication. The selection criteria will require that you have a publication record, because they want students to enroll in the PhD by publication who have scientific writing skills, who understand the publication world, the processes of publishing an article, the processes of uploading an article to a journal. This might sound like nothing important, but it's quite a lengthy and a tedious process to upload a manuscript to a journal. All the manuscripts are uploaded electronically, so there are different steps that you have to follow, different information that you have to enter. There are declarations that you have to make in terms of funding, in terms of conflict of interest, in terms of your contribution that you've made in all the steps of the research process. So you learn a lot by only uploading an article. But the most important point is you've done this research. The reality is people don't read, or very seldom read, dissertations or theses. So you want people to read your research, publish your research, let it be out there in the scientific world. It's another way of also peer assessing, understanding what the bigger world out there feels and thinks about your research. You get feedback from that. You see yourself being cited in other articles. So there is a lot of value and growth by publishing an article. You do that with your supervisor. In most cases, the supervisor is the co-author, where the student is always the first author. There are some supervisors who say they do not publish with the students, but in most cases, the student and the supervisor publish together because they were engaged in the research together at different levels, in different roles, and in different phases of the research, but it is a collaborative process in the end. For doctoral students, all those students who registered in 2020 and onwards, they must prepare 2 manuscripts, and the supervisor will also co-author with you, or the supervisor and the co-supervisor, but the authorship will be discussed from the start. So the supervisor will indicate to you that they could maybe say that they will co-author one article with you, and the co-supervisor might co-author the other article with you, or both articles, the student, the supervisor, and the co-supervisor are the authors. So that will be determined right from the start, and then your supervisor will also guide you in terms of the journal that would be most suitable. It must be a journal that is on the DHET list of accredited journals. That list, your supervisor will have the list, but you can also access the list on the DHET system. And then you will look at the different lists. There's the Scopus, the Web of Science, the Norwegian list, the DOAJ list. There are different lists. You access all those lists and check whether the journal you want to publish in indeed appears on that list. What is also important when you look at the journal and you decide on a journal, you will always discuss it with your supervisor and get the approval of your supervisor when you choose the journal. In choosing a journal, one would also look at the page fees. What are the costs involved in publishing in a journal? Nowadays, we have journals that charge up to 50,000-60,000 Rand per article. UNISA will not pay all the page fees if it's that high. At this stage, UNISA pays 20,000 Rand per article, and then the departments can top up the page fees with another 10,000 Rand. So you can go up to 30,000 Rand per article, provided that that the authorship is correct and that the article meets all the requirements that the university sets before they will approve the funds. For the masters, I just wanted to add that there will be a requirement before the exam results are released. The supervisor will also submit the evidence that the two manuscripts were submitted to a journal. So you receive a proof of submission once you've submitted an article or a manuscript, and that will be attached to the examination report. And or if it has not been done when the examination reports are submitted, then as soon as they have been uploaded or submitted to a journal, those documents must be presented before the degree will be awarded to you. The administrative processes or the administrative preparation will involve the examination dates. In other words, when is the time right? When can you submit? I've given you the 2 dates. It does happen that students are not ready on that exact date of the 15th of June or 15th of November. So there is some leeway that will be allowed in terms of the submission. And we will discuss it just now. And then also, if you are one of the students who will undergo an oral examination, the requirements for the oral examination will be communicated with you. You will receive a document from the non-examining chairperson who will give you all the requirements of the oral examination. The intent to submit, or the notice that you are going to send to the examination department, is the CGS 20 document. It's the notice of intention to submit, which your supervisor must sign and the chair of department must also approve. And of importance here is that the title is correct, because a delay or a mistake in the title causes a delay in the submission process. So the title must be correct in terms of the wording, the punctuation, everything. So as I mentioned, the submission periods are 15 June and 15 November. If you submit by 15 June and you are successful, in other words, you pass, and the examiners did not delay the process by submitting the reports late, you will graduate in the October graduation. But if if you submit after the 15th of June, you lose the guarantee of graduating in September, and then you will most probably only graduate in the autumn graduation, the March, April, May graduation of the next year. If the submission takes place after the 15th November, there is no guarantee that you will graduate during the autumn graduation, and it could only then be in the spring of that following year. Now, with the end of the year submissions, there is some leeway. So you are registered for the full year. You cannot submit by 15 November, but you are able to submit in January or even in February. It is allowed to submit up to 28 February. But this date you must please not regard as the submission date. The submission date is 15 November. Please do not aim for 28 February. See that as a last resort if you cannot complete and submit by 15 November. Do not see 28 February as your submission date. Too many students have miscalculated their time, and I can talk from experience. Last year, my PhD student submitted 2 weeks after the 28th of February because there was a delay in the language editing, and that student had to register and pay the full year fee for those 2 weeks. So please do not fall into that trap. Make sure that you submit. You aim for 15 November, you submit 15 November, but if all else fails and if something happens, then at least there is a little bit of extra time, but you will then only graduate in spring. You will also, if it's after the 28th of February, like I've said, you will have to re-register and pay the full tuition fee. And that is really a very, very hard thing to do, to pay that full, is it 19,000 Rand for a 2-week delay. Right, so if a student is, in other words, if you've submitted the 28th of February, or you did not make the 28th of February, or you did not have internet connection and you submit the 2nd or the 3rd of March, they will not send out your thesis for examination unless you are a registered student. You have to re-register if you do not submit within the period. The title change must be corrected and must be checked before you submit for examination, before you submit your intent to submit document, because all the documents for examination must be with the correct document. So in terms of the title change, please discuss that with your supervisor. Don't just change words because it sounds better to you. There are documents that have to be completed to register the latest title. And if necessary, like I've mentioned, the ethics certificate must also then be updated. Submitting for examination, the examination copies must be prepared according to the requirements and submitted in Word and PDF version. And like I've mentioned, the supervisor must approve the final documents because they sign a form that indicates that they are approving your submission, that you are ready to submit, that the title is correct. So they sign a document. So the supervisor must approve before you submit. And then, as I've mentioned, the submission is online, and you will receive that link from the exam department. Sometimes students miss the link in the letter. They think it's just a friendly letter from exams saying that you can now submit, and then they miss the link, and then they keep on asking for the link because they haven't read the document properly. So you always have to read documents well, but when it comes to the end of this process, please make sure that you read your documents that you receive from the university carefully. They will also give you examples of what the front pages of the thesis must look like. So if the title changes, the supervisor will confirm that the title is correct, and then we'll make sure that all the administrative processes have been followed correctly. And these title changes or errors in titles might be very, very small, or you might think it is very small. But if the title is not exactly the way it should be, it will be returned from examination department before they submit to the examiners for examination. And you can see this, the minor things like the or a, or punctuation or singular or plural when it's experience or experiences. Make sure that your wording is exactly correct. Here is an example of a title that was a thesis that was not sent to the examiners because of the errors. You can see using abbreviations or the full word, omitting a word or a word or two. So you see the differences. In the first one, it said, so the student submitted with the first one saying guidelines for adherence to tuberculosis treatment among San community in Chumkwe constituency of Otsuzon Jupa region, Namibia, whereas in the other one, they used TB, the abbreviation. They did not indicate the San community, but only community, and they only gave the name of the region and did not include the word region. Can you see? You might think these are minor issues, and they do not make a difference in terms of the meaning, but every word and every punctuation matters. Okay, so you are now ready. You know what the outline of the requirements are. You know how you must present your scientific report and meet the requirements. And you've read it critically before submitting, and then you also ensure that the correct version was uploaded and submitted, and then you will wait for your exam results. For those who will then have to do the oral defense, I will not go through all the processes again. We discussed that last week, but it will be those students who registered in 2022 onwards. You will have to prepare your presentation, you will practice your defense, and you will also go through a process of reviewing your thesis to ensure that you know what is in your thesis before you engage in the oral examination. So when the feedback from the examiners come, you are going to be very anxiously awaiting the results. The examiners have 6 weeks to examine, but take into consideration that there are administrative processes on both sides. In other words, when you submit, there is some administration that that has to be completed before it goes to the examiners. Then the examiners have 6 weeks, and when they submit the reports after 6 weeks, there are administrative processes that the non-examining chairperson must complete before you can get any feedback from the examiners. So in total, it's not only going to be 6 weeks, it's definitely going to be more than 6 weeks. So please be patient, communicate with your supervisor when it gets to the 6 weeks or 7 weeks, just communicate with them. They will a part of the support is to set you at ease and to manage your stress at this stage, which is high, we know. But communicate with your supervisor in terms of your expectations for receiving the reports. Once the non-examining chairperson has received the reports and it is a unanimous pass, then they will anonymize the reports and they will send the reports to your supervisor. Your supervisor will then discuss the reports with you. Do not jump into making the corrections without discussing the corrections with your supervisor. You must understand the corrections, and I will show you examples where the student and supervisor not necessarily agreed with the feedback from the examiners, and you can indicate that you do not agree. You can write a rebuttal. So discuss the corrections with your supervisor, especially if they are related to methodology or your data. If it's technical, it's less of an issue if you make the corrections based on what the examiners have said. But in terms of the methodology and the content, you and your supervisor must agree that the comments are valid, that the corrections required are valid, and that the supervisor indeed wants you to make those corrections. So you must understand the corrections. You must understand why you make the corrections. When you start with your corrections, it might feel overwhelming. Now you have your final thesis that you've submitted, and now you have to start somewhere. What are you going to do? How are you going to approach it? Follow a logical process. So take your final version, rename that document to clearly indicate that this is the revised version. So again, you can either rename it as revised thesis, but always add the date. Or if you don't add a date, add a number, but the date is always better to ensure that you are clear when you made those corrections. Then you start with your corrections in a logical manner. There are 3 examiners in a PhD. Now, you discuss this with your supervisor. Some might say to you, take them examiner for examiner and make the corrections. Other supervisors might guide you by indicating that you should take it chapter for chapter or section for section and address all the comments that were made in chapter 1 by all 3 of the examiners, which is often the most logical way of approaching the corrections. But approach them in a logical manner and make notes of what you have changed. I will also show you examples of how you can draw up that table with the corrections, but you must keep record of the corrections. You must clearly indicate what you corrected and where you've corrected it. Sorry, did someone wanted to say something, or was it just... Okay, no, that's all right. If necessary, it might have to go for language editing again, and that will depend on the extent of the corrections that were made, but also it will depend on the comments that were made. So some examiners might require that you have it language edited again, because there are too many errors in terms of language, maybe in terms of tenses or in terms of spelling or whatever. So the examiner's reports might also indicate that that must go for language editing again. If there are a fairly high number of corrections, I want to say in all cases it would be best practice to submit the thesis once you've made the corrections, submit it to turn it in again for a new Turnitin report. If there are really very minor corrections, and it does happen where a student has 5, 6, or 7 very small corrections that will not make a difference to the Turnitin report, then in consultation with your supervisor, you might decide not to submit it to Turnitin again. But there's no harm in submitting it in any case to Turnitin again. You will report on the corrections or the rebuttals that you've made. It can either be in a table form, which is actually the easiest way of reporting your corrections, or it could be in a narrative form, and the narrative form would typically be in cases where there are very few corrections that need not be tabulated. This is an example where a student compiled the response to the examiner's comments. It's the student name, number, and the title of the dissertation. This was a master's study. And here, now you must remember your supervisor must check the corrections before they finalize and approve the final version. So for your supervisor to check the corrections, and for any reference purposes, find a way of making the corrections in the thesis. Track changes could work, but then the page numbers change, and the format of the entire document changes. So the best way is to highlight the changes in a specific color. Now, this student, for example, highlighted the changes she made required from examiner 1. She highlighted in green, and the examiner 2's changes highlighted in blue. So when the supervisor gets back the revised thesis, they can go through the thesis and see all the highlighted sections where the corrections were made. So the supervisor then has a good view of what the final document will look like, the new final document, but with the corrections highlighted. If it was done with track changes, then all the pages would move. And if you accept the changes, then the pages change again. So we want to cause as little as possible disturbance to the formatting of the thesis or the dissertation. And by doing it this way, it will ensure that the page numbers do not necessarily change. They might change because you add text, but then at least you can see where it changed, and you can immediately also attend to the format of the thesis, the final format of the thesis. Once the supervisor is then satisfied that you've made all the corrections, you can remove the highlight. You will save it again, a new version, and then remove the highlight so that you have a clean document that will be submitted again. Now, if it is a unanimous pass and you have to make the corrections, your final document will be submitted to the supervisor. It will not be uploaded onto the system again. It will be submitted to the supervisor, and the supervisor will submit it with their report to the non-examining chairperson, who will submit it to the exam department, the college and the exam department. If it is a non-unanimous result and you have to resubmit for re-examination, as I mentioned, you will then upload it onto the system the same way in which you did when you initially uploaded your thesis. I was indicating that you will have 2 or 3 versions here. And the reason for that is that you have the initial version that you uploaded for examination. Then you have the revised version with the corrections highlighted. And then you have the final revised version without any highlights, which will be your final document that will be uploaded onto the UNISA institutional repository once the examination process has been completed. This is another this is an example where it might not be very clear because I think the text is quite small, but you can get the idea of the table. So the comments of examiner 1 is in one column. The comments of examiner 2 will be in the second column, where it appears in the dissertation and the page numbers, how the concerns were addressed. And then this one added a column where the supervisor then also writes a comment. So in this case, for example, the comments were there was not a clear chapter 2, in other words, a clear literature review chapter. It's a qualitative study. The provisional literature review or the initial review was part of chapter 1. And the one examiner made a comment about that, and the supervisor then indicated that the student indicated that they are not going to change it, and the supervisor also indicated that there was a decision made not to use a literature chapter to avoid preconceived ideas in this qualitative study. So they've given a reason why they did not address the comment of the one examiner. So this is in the end the supervisor that will guide you in terms of these kind of comments or rebuttals that will be provided. There's another example where the student highlighted the corrections that were made, where they indicated there was a mistake. The student highlighted or indicated that they deleted that, and then also provided the page number. If the table is like this, the student and the supervisor will also discuss if there are any rebuttals. They will discuss that, and the supervisor will then approve that the changes were not made, and also have the reasons. They could put that in their second report. The examiner writes a final the supervisor writes a final report where they indicate that all the corrections were made to their satisfaction. So in that report, they can indicate that if we go back to that example of the chapter 2, they can indicate that although examiner 1 questioned the absence of a full literature review, this was the reason why it was done in that way, and because it is a qualitative study, there was a literature control rather than a literature review. So the literature review came when the findings were discussed. So that will depend on the style that is used in the department, in the discipline, or even the supervisor's style. So that is why it's important that you discuss all the comments of the examiners with your supervisor. There is an example of a rebuttal where the examiner said that the abstract requires subheadings, and the student could indicate there that the instruction is not aligned to the UNISA guide. So you can indicate your reason why it was not done. Here was a discussion on the theoretical framework, and the student indicated that a conceptual framework was introduced in chapter 2 and was linked to the development of the data collection instrument and further guided the chapter 4 and 5. Whereas the examiner referred to a theoretical framework. So this response from the student also shows that the student understands the use of a theoretical framework or a conceptual framework. With the final process, you've now made the corrections, attended to the examiner's comments. You will then submit your corrected version to your supervisor with a new file name. You will also submit the report on the corrections. You will submit a new Turnitin report and receipt, except for those cases where it really is not necessary. You will submit the ethics certificate. Once your supervisor has checked the corrections, the color or highlights are removed. So make sure that that final version does not have any color or any highlights in. And the final document will be submitted to the supervisor in both a Word format and PDF format. Your supervisor will again look at the Turnitin report, if applicable, and accept the report or ask you to attend to it. And then once they've received the final version and the necessary document, they will write the final report that confirms all corrections were made to their satisfaction, and they will submit it then to the non-examining chairperson, who will in turn submit it to the college, and then from there it will be submitted to the examination department, and the examination department will then check all the requirements of the degree. Does it meet all the requirements? Was the student required to submit to manuscripts? Is there proof of the submission of the manuscripts? Does the student meet all the necessary requirements for the degree? And they will then issue a letter. The letter will come from the examination department. The supervisor receives the result letter at the same time as the student. So it's not the supervisor who is nasty by not giving you your marks once you've completed your masters. They also don't know. The supervisor sees the mark at the same time as that you see the marks. So the letter that goes to the student also goes to the supervisor, or the supervisor receives the student's result letter, but also receives another letter as supervisor that indicates that the study is complete and that the student has passed the degree, and also if it's a master's, what the percentage is. In terms of the graduation date, that comes a bit later. Once all the exam results have been submitted to graduation, they start planning the graduation ceremonies, and you will receive, again at the same time as the supervisor, you will receive a date for the graduation ceremony. If you have a special request, communicate with your supervisor. It is not always possible, but sometimes it does happen that a student, say, might move to New Zealand, and they will only be available the first week of the graduation season or period, and they might request a particular date. There's no guarantee that they will get it, but if there are exceptional circumstances, you can communicate with your supervisor and see whether the supervisor can communicate with graduations and maybe find a date that will be suitable. But don't start choosing dates and send it to the supervisor or the graduation department. They will not be able to adhere to that. If you think of the numbers of graduates, then it will just be impossible. But exceptional cases are possible. Then lastly, I just want to talk about the mental preparation. This pre-submission phase is really an intense period. So you must prepare yourself mentally well for that final period. Make sure that your circumstances at work, your circumstances at home will allow you to attend to your finalization of your thesis. This is really a very intense period that you also have to plan for. It is not something that will happen within a few days. Prepare yourself to make revisions, go back and forth and improve. And even if your supervisor gives you feedback and requests you to make corrections, and then he or she reads it again and then comes back with more corrections, prepare yourself, it will happen. As supervisor, you read the thesis, you don't always see all the mistakes because you've also become so used to this study, and you also sometimes miss these mistakes. So it might be a back and forth of the same chapter that you thought you would have completed. And also then prepare yourself that there will be corrections from the examiners. I have never ever seen an examiner's report that does not have any corrections. So prepare yourself, there will be revisions, you are going to make corrections, you will have to improve the thesis or the dissertation before it is finalized. So prepare yourself for that. Should it happen that it is a resubmission and that you have to resubmit for examination, yes, it is in fact a fail, because it must be re-examined. But you need to stay positive. You need to communicate with your supervisor. You need to ask for support if you do not get sufficient support. You need moral support. You need academic support. You need that support from your supervisor. If need be, you could get more support from the librarian, for example, to search for more recent sources. Make sure that your personal environment also is conducive in terms of the support when the unfortunate happens and you have to resubmit for examination. It's not the end of the world. It does happen. And it's not always a bad thing, because we have seen students submitting excellent final products after a resubmission. It's all to improve the quality, and in the end, that final thesis is going to stay forever It's going to be next to your name forever. It's going to be on the institutional repository. People are going to read it. So we want the best quality, and it is not the end of the world if it does happen that you have to resubmit for re-examination. For the re-examination, it will only be the examiner who failed the student, who will re-examine the thesis. On completion, celebrate the significant achievement. It is a major achievement to pass a master's degree or a PhD degree. So celebrate that significant achievement. Reflect on the journey and the lessons learned throughout the doctoral process or the master's process. And let that also guide you in your future endeavors in terms of research or any academic ventures that you want to engage in. Plan for your future, plan for a potential postdoctoral journey, or plan for a doctoral study if you've completed your master's. Plan for your publication journey, and also then plan for your practice journey. What are you going to do with your with the knowledge that you've gained? You are so much richer in terms of the content knowledge. You are so much more experienced and richer in terms of methodology and processes knowledge. So what are you going to do with that? How are you going to implement that? You might implement a journal club at your workplace to stimulate a research culture in the environment. Look at what you've achieved in your study. Look at the outcomes of the study. Can you implement that in your day-to-day activities at work? Can you inform policies in the workplace? Can you maybe engage in training or development of other colleagues? So please use the experiences, the knowledge that you've gained in your journey to your benefit, but also to the benefit of the bigger scientific environment and the community and your profession. I'm going to pause there and allow some time for questions and answers. I will put my camera on. There you go. Let me just look at the questions, whether there are any questions. Sorry, it is just loading. Okay. Is it possible to get peers review without supervisor permission? You can ask anybody to read your work. Your supervisor does not have to give you permission to give it to peers to read. But when you make changes based on comments that came from the peers or from a critical reader, it's important that you discuss that with your supervisor. Ultimately, your supervisor will have to approve your work. And a peer might not be experienced enough or knowledgeable enough and might even send you in the wrong direction. You know, sometimes a peer might think that they know everything about statistics because they've completed a master's study and used or did a quantitative study, so they understand statistics, but they might not guide you in the right direction. So you can ask anybody to read your work, but always communicate with your supervisor when you want to make corrections or changes. For up-to-date data information, is it such as information changes through time, like incidence or prevalence for everything? Otherwise, fact is always fact. TB transmits from infected person to other health during coughing. That is a fact which cannot be changed. I'm not sure what the question is, but yes, information does change over time. If you think of the information that we have about the vaccinations against COVID-19, the information that we now have that we did not have about the transmission of the virus, yes, information does change, and that is why research is so dynamic. And once you've completed a study on, for example, TB, does not mean that you will not do any further research on TB. I'm one of the students who are starting proposal, but my research title is too general. So is it a must to receive a letter from CREC? Your proposal will not go to the ethics committee until it is complete. So your title will change at the beginning. When you conceptualize your study, your title will change. You and your supervisor will refine the title, but you've registered with a certain title. So that title will be on the system. So the supervisor might decide to either change the title just before you submit for ethics clearance, or they might decide to leave the title on the system as it is, and then towards the end of the study only change the title. Now, there are pros and cons to both of them. If the title is very general, like I think yours might be, if I look at your comment, and the title changes quite significantly and is then much more focused, and maybe even the topic changed to some extent, then the supervisor might decide to change the title before you submit for ethics clearance. But otherwise, they can also, if there are minor changes to the title, it can be done towards the end of the study. If you change the title early, the possibility of having to change it again is there. So then it will be another communication to the ethics committee to change the title again, and maybe another ethics certificate. So you discuss the title change with your supervisor, and your supervisor will then indicate, yes, the changes are extensive. I want it to be changed on the system. As supervisors, we also receive spreadsheets from time to time before every college board meeting. And in that spreadsheet, your student name will appear and your title will appear. And the supervisor can also change the title on that spreadsheet that comes from the student administration side. Change the title there, especially if ethics clearance have not been awarded, then they will update the system with a new change. So you discuss the title change with your supervisor, but it's good that you ask the question, because I want you to be aware of the importance of having the correct title, and especially when it comes to the submission, that when the thesis is submitted, that the title that the thesis is submitted with is the same one that appears on the UNISA system. I hope that answers your question. Does the proposal submission of the end of October also apply to people registered end of May? We say that students have a year to complete their proposal. If students register late, and we've discussed that in a meeting again last week, it is a problem because the time is limited. So you will have to work very hard if you've registered late. The process will have to be expedited where possible, but not compromising quality. If your proposal has not been completed by end of October, your supervisor has the opportunity to indicate that you have progressed well, and that you may continue with your proposal the next year. They will capture that on the student system. So there is an activity where they can indicate the student has progressed well, has not completed the proposal, but has progressed well and may re-register for the next year. We no longer have the separate proposal module, so you register for your degree from the word go, and so there's not a separate registration. So it depends on your progress. If you've registered end of May and you have not made progress with your proposal by the end of October, your supervisor can indicate that there is no progress, your proposal has not been completed or is not close to completion, and you may not re-register. But if there is progress, there is that leeway that you can continue with your proposal the next year. There's someone who asked how they can get in touch with the librarian for help. Your supervisor, your department should give you, all departments have some form of information leaflet, be it a tutorial letter or some information leaflet on the processes in the department, the format that they require for the dissertation and the thesis. And they will then indicate who the personal librarian is that is allocated to the department. So in your department, there is a particular or specific librarian that is allocated to the department. So that name you must get from your supervisor, and you can communicate with that librarian for support. Regarding the 2 publications for PhD, I understand that results will not be released until proof of submission is provided. Please, can you clarify whether this must be provided concurrently with submission of the final thesis, even prior to perhaps revision needs? The final submission that the supervisor has to submit, where the supervisor indicates that all the corrections have been made, whether it was a resubmission or not, there is a final submission. A supervisor always writes two non-evaluative reports. The first non-evaluative report the supervisor writes when the student submits, and then the supervisor has to report on the supervision journey, the interaction that they had with the student, and the processes that they followed, when was ethical clearance given, and all that information they provide in the first non-evaluative report. The second non-evaluative report is the final report, where the supervisor indicates that the student has adhered to all the requirements of the examination process, all the requirements and corrections of the examiners, and as supervisor, they are now satisfied that all the corrections have been made. This is the final thesis, and this is the evidence that the student has submitted the 2 manuscripts to the journal. So it goes with the final thesis and the final report. How long does it take to receive approval to change the title? That is really just an administrative process. The supervisor writes to the ethics committee if it's a new ethics certificate, or even the approval, the change of title, which is a document that will go to the exam department. As soon as the supervisor has signed, the chair of department has approved it, and then it goes via the college office to also be approved, and then to the administration department or the exam department. So it should not take longer than a week. If everybody signs where and when they are supposed to sign, it should not take longer than a week. But remember, you're not going to sit and wait. There's always something to do. You will, even if it's right at the end and there was a mistake with a plural or a singular word or whatever, you can still go through your thesis again and make sure that everything is in order while you wait for the final go-ahead that you can submit. Can you share more information regarding the postdoc fellowship? What is it, and how does one get into this space? The postdoc fellowship is an advertised position. They've actually advertised this week again. So the university advertises the positions. If your PhD must not be older than 5 years, you can apply for a fellowship where you will then have a mentor. It could be your supervisor, or it could be another researcher in the department. You will apply for a position in a specific department. So you will then apply with a research plan. So what you will do as postdoc fellow is you will do research. You are required to publish 2 outputs per year, and you will then also be required to engage in research activities in the department. For example, arrange seminars in the department, or workshops in the department, or participate in a writing retreat. You can be asked to arrange the writing retreat. So you will be engaged in research related activities, and then engage in research with your mentor. Some parts of your study can be without the mentor, but there will also be collaboration between you and the mentor in terms of research and research outputs. It is a paid position. It's a 3-year contract, and don't quote me, but if I'm not mistaken, it is a remuneration of, I think, 30,000 Rand per month that you will receive as research, as postdoc fellow. What happens if I do not submit my proposal last year, but I was allowed to register this year? You don't have to take any steps. As I said, there is no proposal module anymore, so it's not a matter of you having to pass the proposal module. If your supervisor indicates that your progress was good enough for you to continue and register for the next year, then you go ahead and you finish your proposal as soon as possible. Please don't allow it to go towards the end of the second year, because that can be very problematic, because your proposal, once your supervisor has approved your proposal, it must still go for scientific review in the department's higher degrees committee, and they must also approve the proposal. So you must allow at least 2 months for that process also to take place, especially towards the end of the year. It's examination time. Colleagues go on leave, so please don't, in your second year, don't go right up to the end of the year. Try to complete it as soon as possible. The proposal submission should be within 6 months, starting from the first month of admission. Can it be extended depending on the comments or other inconveniences? Yes, actually the proposal must be completed within the first year of study. Some departments have different arrangements. They might require that it must be within 6 months, but that will be communicated with you from the department side. And then also what happens, what is plan B if you cannot complete the proposal within the 6 months. So communicate with your supervisor or with the M&D coordinator in your department. In our department, we have general meet and greet sessions as well. So we will invite all the M&D students to a meet and greet session where we discuss these general aspects that relate to our discipline or to our department. What happens if one examiner fails the student and one passes with a third examiner? Will a third examiner be appointed? No. This is typically a non-unanimous result. So the non-examining chairperson will look at the 2 reports, and without sending the reports to the supervisor, if it's non-unanimous, the results will first go to the college. So the non-examining chairperson will read the 2 examiners' reports. He or she will also read the supervisor report and then compile a comprehensive report and make a recommendation. Now, if it's a master study and the one examiner, we have a case now where the one examiner gave 90% and the other examiner failed the student. So then one has to look at, why is it such an exceptionally high mark, and why is it such an exceptionally low or a low mark, a fail mark? And the non-examining chairperson will then make a recommendation. So the recommendation could be that the student should pass on the average, or that the student should resubmit, because the report of the examiner who failed the student is a very comprehensive, detailed report and has highlighted many important shortcomings in the study, or the the non-examining chairperson may indicate that it should, they recommend a pass without indicating anything about the marks. The same goes for a PhD study. If there are 3 examiners, one does not necessarily go with the majority. It depends on what the reports say, what the problems are. If there are methodological issues, if there are ethical issues, then one would carefully look at the examiner who, or the examiners who passed the student, whether they picked up the methodological issues and whether they picked up the ethical issues. So it is not a decision that is made by one person. The non-examining chairperson makes a recommendation. It goes to the college, and the college has processes, and there's a committee that then makes the final decision whether the student should pass or whether it should be a resubmission. And once that committee at college level has made the decision, depending on whether it's a master's or a PhD, it can go up to the vice principal research, who will make the final decision that this should be a resubmission. And that final decision will then go back to the non-examining chairperson. And the non-examining chairperson will then communicate with the supervisor and indicate that the student must resubmit for examination. Here are the reports. So this is these are the comments that the student has to work on, but the corrections are extensive, and the student must work on these corrections and then follow the same process as what they followed when they initially submitted the thesis and uploaded for resubmission. So they will again complete the intent to submit document and request a link, and then upload the final document, going through those same processes with the supervisor until the supervisor has approved the final thesis, and it will be uploaded again, and it will go back to the examiner who failed the student, and that examiner or examiners will then mark the thesis again. If it's a master's study, the dissertation goes back to both the examiners. Even the one who passed you, it will go back to both the examiners. But in the case of the PhD, it will only go to the examiner who failed the study. I hope that answers the question. There are instances where a third examiner may be appointed, and these will also be exceptional cases, but there might be concerns about the report of the examiner. Any of the examiners, be it the one who gave 90% with no justification for such an exceptionally high mark, or someone who failed a student with really no valid justifications, the university might decide to appoint a third examiner. It also sometimes happens that the examiner is not available to re-examine or is not interested in re-examining. We've had that before, where examiners said that I'm failing the student and I'm not willing to re-examine the student. So it does happen, or when it, but in exceptional cases, it's really only the exception. And then also in cases where there's an appeal, if the appeal is successful, an arbitrator will be appointed. But in the case of an arbitration, the outcome of the arbitrator, the decision of the arbitrator is final. So if the arbitrator gives you a lower mark or a more negative report, that is the final report. Okay, I think that was the last question. Any more questions? I think there are 15 minutes left. If there are any more questions, you are welcome to post them in the question and answers. If not, then I want to thank you for your attention, and I hope you don't have more questions than answers after this session. And I just want you to, when you prepare for your examination, look after yourself, be well prepared, make sure you have support from all sides, be it from the university or from your family. But it is a stressful time for you, and self-care is important during that phase. I see there's one question that came. What happens if one examiner fails the student and one passes with the third examiner? Oh, no, that one I've already answered. Now, I think all the questions were answered. Okay, then thank you very much, and have a good evening.